All right, Nate, flipping over to the NFC South today, we're going to start off with the Atlanta Falcons. Their win total is set at 9.5. They're minus 134 to win the NFC South, plus 3,000 to win the Super Bowl, all courtesy of Bally Bet. The Falcons have a new head coach in Raheem Morris and made a big splash in free agency signing Kirk Cousins. Do these moves make the Falcons justified to be the winner of the division?
Yeah, I actually do. The Falcons were a team that had high expectations last season, but they completely failed. And I think a big part of that was Arthur Smith as the head coach just ran an
Mhm.
offense that didn't really fit with the players that they've recently drafted. I mean, they drafted Bijan Robinson, and Arthur Smith loves to run the ball, but they would use Cordero Patterson and Tyler Algier and not give Bijan most of the work. So there's a lot of questionable calls that Atlanta was making. They also drafted Kyle Pitts and Drake London in the previous two drafts, pass catchers who they hardly use. So it just didn't seem like things were meshing. It was also a defense that was decent, but then they also would give up big drives at the end of the game to lose games and wouldn't be able to get a clutch stop. So I think now it's kind of a new era for the Falcons. You have a huge quarterback upgrade from what they had last year. With Kirk Cousins coming in, you pair him with an offensive coordinator and Zach Robinson, who coached with Raheem Morris in LA. Robinson learned under Sean McVay, so you know that he's going to be able to maximize some of that offensive talent, specifically the pass catchers. And I think the defense should be better because Morris was a defensive coordinator for the Rams, got the most out of some of the talent there. There was a lot of young players around Aaron Donald, and they were actually pretty good. And then the Falcons made some nice moves just recently, signing safety Justin Simmons and trading for Matthew Judon. So it kind of shows their urgency that they want to win this year, and it makes sense after going out and paying a veteran quarterback like Kirk Cousins. In terms of wanting to bet on them and how to kind of approach the division odds and maybe an entry point, I would say the schedule is very favorable for the Falcons. However, you have the Steelers in week one where they're a 3-point favorite, and the way Pittsburgh's trending, I would favor Atlanta in that game. However, week two, you go on the road Monday night against the Eagles, and then week three, you play the Chiefs. So definitely looking maybe at a 1-2 start for the Falcons. But if they do start 1-2 and then are plus money to win the division, I think that's a way to go about it and take Atlanta at that point because the rest of the schedule is pretty easy, and I'm not too high on the other teams in the NFC South. So maybe a wait and see on approach on Atlanta in terms of betting them because they have those two tough games in weeks two and weeks three. But I do like this team in general, and I do have high expectations for them, at least within the division. Maybe not to win a playoff game, but I do like them to top the NFC South.
Sure. All right, let's switch over to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Their win total is set at 7.5. They're plus 333 to repeat as NFC South champs, and plus 8,000 to win the Super Bowl, all courtesy of Valley Bet. The Buccaneers were a surprise team last season, and they're pretty much running it back, led by the same group, including Baker Mayfield at quarterback. How are you betting the Buccaneers this season?
Yeah, the Buccaneers are a clear regression team for me. I have a large bet on them at under 8.5. I placed before the season. I still think under 7.5 is okay. This is a team last year that was 4-7 at one point. Looked like they were going absolutely nowhere, and then they win five of their last six to make the playoffs. They end up winning a playoff game against the Eagles. But if you think about what the Eagles were back then, they were really downtrending. They were had a horrible end of the season, and it wasn't really a surprise that the bottom fell out of Philly and Tampa Bay was able to win this game or win that game. They also lose their offense coordinator, Dave Canales, within the division of the Panthers, who I think did a great job at maximizing Baker Mayfield and then getting him a new contract. If you look at this season's team, I just talked about how I expect regression because they are running it back with a quarterback I'm not too high on. And then you look at their schedule between weeks 7 and 10, they play the Ravens, Falcons, at the Chiefs, and 49ers within a 20-day stretch. So if they start off the season a little shaky, they might get hit in the mouth in the middle of the season and really fall back in the pack, which I'm kind of hoping for in terms of my bet. This team reminds me a lot of the 2022 Giants. It was a team that had no expectations going in the year that year. They end up making the playoffs with quite a bit of luck. They win a wild card game, lose in the divisional rounds, and then they pay their overachieving quarterback that season that led them to the playoffs. And in the Giants' case, it was Daniel Jones in 2022 into 2023. And that team was terrible last season. This year, the 2023 Bucks, or the last year, 2023 Bucks paid Baker Mayfield, and now I'm expecting big time regression like the Giants did last year. for this Tampa Bay team. So it's a team I bet under their win total on. I also bet against them in week one as they're laying over a field goal against the Commanders. So complete sell
Yeah.
sign on the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. One of my stronger opinions going into the NFL season.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to back you on that one, Nate. All right, Nate, let's move on to the New Orleans Saints. Their win total is set at 7.5. They're plus 400 to win the NFC South and plus 8,000 to win the Super Bowl, all courtesy of Bally Bet. Last season, the Saints fell short of expectations with a new head coach in Dennis Allen, a new QB in Derek Carr. Is there anything to be excited about this team next year?
I was doing the deep dive research on every team all off season. I just can't get excited about this team. I feel like out of the 32 teams in the NFL, this is the one I'm least excited to talk about. So I'll keep this short. I will say last season the Saints were the favorite to win the division. Their win total was 9.5 because of how easy their schedule was. However, when you give expectations for a duo like Dennis Allen and Derek Carr, you're bound to be disappointed, and that's what they did, falling short of their win total and not making the playoffs. Now that the win total's down to 7.5, I think you can make a case to kind of buy low on them because Allen kind of there's not a totally low floor or bottom out floor for him just because he is a solid defensive coordinator. So they are going to keep games close and maybe they'll win a few of them. But Derek Carr's ceiling is low, so you're never going to expect them to win a lot. So if I had to take any, betting takeaway from this, or if you want to have a betting takeaway from anything Saints related, they are a 4.5 point favorite in week one against the Panthers. Don't really know a team that's quarterbacked by Derek Carr, coached by Dennis Allen, should be laying that many points against anyone in the NFL, even the Carolina Panthers. So I might have some interest against the Saints in week one, but I also could see them winning like 8 to 9 games, going over the win total, and just being a very
Wow.
unexciting, maybe wild card contender at best.
Kind of a middle of the pack team. All right,
Very.
let's switch over to the Carolina Panthers, Nate. Their win total is set at 5.5. They're plus 1,100 to win the NFC South and 200 to 1 odds to win the Super Bowl, all courtesy of Bally Bet. Last year was a disastrous season for the Panthers as they had the worst record in the NFL. They didn't even get their number one overall pick. They traded that to the Bears. Is there any optimism in Carolina this year?
So I think there could be, but let's kind of like look back at how miserable the Panthers were last season. They had 2 wins. I think the most damning stat about them is they never took a fourth quarter snap on offense with the lead in any game. They had 2 wins
Wow.
and they were on last second field goals where they never had the lead in the fourth quarter while taking an offensive snap. So just shows how ugly it was. And maybe they're going to be a couple years away, but there is a lot of optimism here for Carolina. I should also add that they fired Frank Reich after 11 games, so it just kind of shows the turmoil going on. And how can I forget? C.J. Stroud was a quarterback they passed on, and he ended up running away with NFL Rookie of the Year, and he looks like the truth. Meanwhile, Bryce Young is, let's just say, there's some uncertainty about him, and this is a big year for him. So, in terms of the optimism for Carolina this year, if you just kind of read the betting market, this was a win total that opened 4.5, has been bet up to 5.5 by respected bettors who thought that 4.5 was too low, especially in a 17-game season. I think their hope is that Dave Canales, who turned around the careers of Geno Smith 2 years ago in Seattle, and then last year in Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield, can get the most out of Bryce Young, who's a quarterback at Alabama who I thought was going to be really good in the NFL. He's a little bit smaller, but he did a lot of great things, I thought, at Alabama with some limited weapons. He wasn't having the weapons that Mac Jones and Tua Tagovailoa did when they were in Tuscaloosa. He was kind of doing it with lesser talent and not as good offensive coaching. So I thought Young would translate well into the NFL. We'll see if he can do it this year with Canales kind of leading the way as the head coach. But at the same time, Canales, young guy, has only called plays 1 year. Now he's the head coach. That's a lot of responsibility for a coach that just doesn't have that much experience. So all that kind of being said, I don't want to bet the over on the Panthers, especially at 5.5, just because it's moved a full game. But I do understand the optimism and maybe consider them as underdogs in week one against a Saints team that has a pretty low ceiling, in my opinion.
All right, Nate, there seems to be a lot of middle of the pack teams in this division. Who do you think is going to come out on top?
Yeah, not the most fun division. I think that's why the Falcons made the aggressive move for Kirk Cousins because they saw an opportunity that,
Hmm.
like, hey, we have kind of a roster with what we've drafted. Let's go get a real quarterback. And and they got Kirk Cousins.
Yep.
I will say they might start off 1-2. So if you kind of are a little bit shaky of the Falcons early in the season, I do think there's a path for them to have a really strong last 14 weeks of the season with one of the easiest schedules in the NFL. As I mentioned, I'm not high at all on the Buccaneers. The Saints are a very kind of neutral team, if anything, more of a sell
Yep.
team for me in terms of like winning a division or anything kind of big. And then the Panthers, I still think there's some time. They were so bad last year that I'm not gonna put my faith on them to win the division. So Atlanta Falcons with me with Kirk Cousins leading the way.